something from I'll be back to oh my back kind of thing. It's supposed to be a joke. Okay. Things happen as we get older. All right, and we don't continue doing the exercise that we should be doing. All right, so muscle. Now again, the way I split this up, like bones, the bones had a lecture portion and a lab portion. The muscles have a lecture portion and a lab portion. The lab will take care of the names of the muscles, will take care of the lab, okay? But the physiology takes a little bit longer to deal with, so we're gonna, at least with the heavier stuff, not so much longer, but more thinking to it than just memorization. Okay, so muscular system. It's about half our body weight, about 600 skeletal muscles in our human body. Okay, again, you won't have to worry about all of them, only half, because you have another 300 on the other side. You just have to worry about, it's about 40, I want you to know. Okay, they work by contracting and relaxation, okay, and they work in teams. They can pull, but they don't push, okay? So if I want to, for instance, this is a good example, my forearm here. If I want to flex my forearm going this way, this muscle, our bicep, is going to pull that muscle this way, okay? Which means the antagonistic muscle, the one underneath here, is going to relax. This will contract and pull. If I want to extend my forearm this way, my bicep is not going to push it, but my triceps, which is connected here and here, is going to pull. So here pulls, here pulls. Pulls, pulls. So muscles pull, they don't push. Does that make sense? Even if I'm trying to push against the door here, for the wall, what's happening is that my tricep is pulling my forearm that way. So I'm still pulling, not pushing, okay? So again, I won't ask you about the percentages here, just showing you in terms of systems, which ones are going to be in proportion of weight, which one is going to produce more weight. It's going to be nearly 50% of your body weight is due to muscle, the muscular system, okay? General functions of muscles, there's a lot of functions, but one of them is obviously movement, to move from one place to another. If I want to alter my environment by moving a stapler, moving the monitor, I can do that with my skeletal muscles. Support heat and energy production, okay? Movement-wise, we can do voluntarily or involuntarily. It's going to be doing where the muscle shortens, or i.e. contracts. Now, I'm from OBGYN, so we use the word contraction quite often. How far are your contractions? In a different way, but I'm going to seem to abbreviate contractions by CTX, because it's just something I'm used to being conditioned to. All right, so muscle fibers shorten, or the muscle tension is increased, and this is what's happening with the contraction. They work in pairs, either by antagonistic or synergistic. Let me show you. What I showed you before was an antagonistic one, where this one's going to contract, but the team member over here is going to do the opposite. As this one contracts, my bicep here, tricep here, my bicep is going to contract, my tricep will relax as that does that. If my tricep is going to contract, then my bicep is going to relax. You can't have both of them contract at the same time. The arm is going nowhere. So this is where they're working antagonistically, okay? But we could also have work in pairs where they're going to work together, okay? And when this happens, we can have my bicep is my main one that's going to flex my arm, but there's going to be one or two other ones that are going to assist that to flex that arm. They're going to work synergistically, okay? Together. Now, coordinate muscle actions. An agonist. An agonist is our prime mover. It's the one that's going to produce the most force. So if I'm using that same example, if I'm going to flex my forearm, my bicep is my prime mover, my agonist. It's going to produce most of that force to flex that elbow or that forearm. I don't know, 80% in this case, I'm guessing, okay? Then we have the synergist. There's going to be a couple other muscles that are going to do the other 20% to bring the forearm inflection motion, right? Then we have the antagonistic one, which is down here, okay? Our tricep in this case. So if the bicep is going to flex, the tricep over here is going to relax, okay? And then we have fixators. When you contract this muscle over here, we have other muscles that are going to move, and I really can't explain it per se unless we talk about the different muscles, but when they move in a certain way, my scapula would flip up. As you push this way, or I'm sorry, pull it this way, our scapula is going to flap up. So we're going to have certain muscles that are going to contract to keep the scapula down, to fixate that scapula so it doesn't move while you're actually doing your action. Okay? So we have this picture here. Again, our bicep is here. It's going to be our agonist or prime mover. We're going to have the antagonist back here, the tricep. We'll have a couple other ones in here as a synergist. In this case, it'll be like our brachial radialis, which you'll learn about later. That's going to help with the bicep to bring it up. The only one that's not up here that's not shown is the fixator, the rhomboids, that'll keep the scapula down when you have this bicep and brachial radialis contracted like that. Okay? So we see that in many different joints throughout the body in one way or another. Okay? Now, we also have what we call muscle tone. And muscle tone is a partial contraction, and this occurs even when people are not moving. Like what you're doing right there in your seat. You're sitting up, and your back muscles are partially contracted to keep you up. If there was no tone in your back, you'll slouch down, which some of you are doing, but that's another reason. But no, you're sitting up like you're driving. You have your back in partial contraction formation. It also dictates our posture, right? You know, if I didn't have any tone in my back, I would be like a block, right? So I have some tone in there, okay? And tonus is slight tension even at rest, which basically the muscle tone. We call it tonus. Okay. Now we have heat and energy production. Muscle contraction is going to produce heat. You do that enough, it's going to produce heat. ATP is our fuel chemical the chemical fuel that we've been talking about, at least with cytology. Now we also have something called lactic acid. Now this is what happens. ATP is, in order for you to make ATP, you need oxygen and you need glucose. We have a constant supply of that coming into our body, or at least stored in our body, and we need to do this. If we use up all the oxygen, then we aren't going to be efficient enough to do whatever we need to do. For instance, if we're running a marathon, if we breathe properly, we know how to use our muscles, we could actually extend our run a little bit longer. That's how athletes kind of train themselves. Okay, eating the proper foods and using the energy and using the right muscles to use, they get more tone. But what happens here is that once you use up all the oxygen, even the best athlete is going to use up the oxygen, and then you've got to go in a different format. You've got to start making ATP without oxygen. You can do this. Our bodies can do this. It's not efficient though, but our bodies can do this. Okay? So best way is to have a lot of oxygen. Once that's all used up, you can still do it, but it's not going to be efficient. And in order to do, if we use oxygen, it's called aerobic respiration, meaning with oxygen. If you don't use oxygen, then we go through what we call anaerobic respiration, and it's not efficient. And not only that, a byproduct that comes off of that when you're not using oxygen is something called lactic acid. When your body produces more acid in your bloodstream, we do that reaction, the carbonic anhydrase reaction, you build up too much oxygen. I said it shifts this way or it shifts that way. That's what happens here. So lactic acid is a waste product that forms once we use up all the oxygen, We now go into a different form of producing ATP, not efficient, but the byproduct is going to be lactic acid. This is a burning, it's acid, so it burns. That's why we get tired after we run a marathon, okay? So what happens here, we got aerobic metabolism, and I'm not going to go into the details about respiration and metabolism stuff, but just understand the concept here. When we use oxygen, it's called aerobic respiration. It's pretty efficient, and for 1 molecule of glucose, you will get a net 36 ATPs. You really get 38, but you got to put 2 into it. You got to invest 2 ATPs to run the machine. So therefore, you're making 38, but you got to give back those other 2. So net-wise, you make 36 ATPs with aerobic. Anaerobic is using no oxygen. You get the lactic acid produced over here, but you only get a net of 2 ATPs with this. So it's not very efficient with this, but we can do it, okay? And that's about as much as I want you to know with metabolism in terms of ATP. Any questions? There's other things about the electron transport chain and Krebs cycle and all that. We're not going to go into that, okay? All these are like, okay, I understand. Okay, so muscle types, all right? Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, all right? Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle. Any questions? No? This is what they look like. There's a little chart. You've seen that before, right? You had it in histology, in lab, you know what that is. I'm not going to stress on that, okay? I mean, I'll stress on it, but we've done that with the tests, okay? I just put it in here to be complete, and you can use these charts for your own review. All right, so connective tissue and skeletal muscle. The basics. Tendons. This is white fibrous, non-elastic band of connective tissue that attaches muscles to bones. And in certain places, this tendon is very wide and thin. We call this an aponeurosis. We see it on the top of her head, we see it on the side of her leg, and a few other places. Okay? You also have fascia. It's connective tissue that covers muscles, and it attaches to tendons. And we have 2 types of fascia. We have deep fascia that's found in between the adjacent muscles, and then we have superficial fascia, which is also known as the hypodermis. Basically, if we take a leg over here and cut right through it, make a transverse cut through the leg, that's what you have here. You've got the bone here, you have different muscles all throughout here, and you have the hypodermis, which is this pink or this yellow area here. So the deep fascia is going to be the fascia in between the muscles, whereas the superficial fascia, or hypodermis, is going to be this yellow area that's going around all outside of the muscle. Okay? Next time you get a steak, you look through all that white stuff. You know, when you buy a steak, you want one that doesn't have all that white stuff, all that fascia, because that's what you're pulling on. Right?
Is the superficial fascia between adipose and muscle tissue? Is that what
Well, the adipose is hypodermis.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what that is in there. Mm-hmm. Okay. Other questions? All right. This is kind of a better appreciation of what I mean by fascia, muscle, tendons. The fascia is around the muscle, but when it extends further and there's no muscle in there, that's a tendon. So a fascia is the tendon just without the muscle. Does that make sense? And that's why we have tendons that connect muscles to bone. Because it was originally, not originally, but it originated from the fascia that's around the muscle. Okay? That's what fascia looks like. When you start fraying your meats and stuff, all that tissue that's in there. That's why when you pick your steak, pick the one that doesn't have much white in it. All right? You want one that has more protein, more of the red meat. Okay? We talked about bursa. I don't want to go into it anymore. Okay? Then we also have retinaculum. A retinaculum is a very translucent band of connective tissue and fascia that holds down tendons. And we have one that's pretty common in the wrist. Let me just show you what's going on here. If I take my arm and I put it right through the board here, and this board is going through my wrist. Does that make sense? I have my carpals in this fashion here, not that many. It's too many. So you have your carpals here. All right, not that many, but it's like that. And my arm is going through, my wrist is going through the board. So this board here is going through the wrist. So my fingers are in the board, my forearm is out of the board. Are you oriented? Okay. So what's happening here is that this is going to be anterior, this will be posterior. Okay? Now going through the wrist, the way the carpals is making this U-shaped area. And we have a retinaculum that's going to be located just above there. It's connective tissue. And what's created over here is this tunnel. You see how I made the tunnel? You know where I'm going with this, right? Okay, we're in the wrist and there's a tunnel there. We're going to get there. Through there, we have tendons and blood vessels going through there to the fingers. Okay? Does that make sense? This tunnel here, we call that, the bones here are called the carpals. So this is the carpal tunnel. Okay? If someone is doing a lot of rigorous movements with their fingers throughout many years, maybe they're typers, you know, they work on the computer a lot, or maybe they play the piano, something where they're crocheting a lot for years and years. What happens here is that this starts getting inflamed because you use those tendons a lot, and it starts building up a lot of fluid in here, and now the tendons have no place to go. They're being pressed down. Does that mean, you see what I'm saying? It's compressed down there. And when it's compressing on the nerves, specifically a nerve that's called the median nerve, we'll learn about the median nerve when we get into the nervous system. But there's a nerve in there where if it presses on it, it creates this pain in most of your hand and your fingers. We call this carpal tunnel syndrome. Okay? So there's our retinaculum. It's also called the transverse carpal ligament. But that's our retinaculum, flexor retinaculum that's up here. And we have nerves and we have tendons that kind of go through here. So what happens here is that you're going to have this carpal tunnel syndrome when you have these rigorous movements going on. So what you got to do is not move your hands in that way. You got to start going back to what it used to be. So they'll put a brace on there. All right? They'll put a brace here to try to prevent you from moving in that direction, so that your wrist can heal. This sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. If it doesn't work, then what they'll do is something called a carpal tunnel release. We'll do surgery right here, and they're going to cut some of this retinaculum, so it gives it more space for that to happen. And that'll usually heal by itself in an area that's going to be much higher than where it was before. And that usually does the trick. Okay? Questions about carpal tunnel syndrome and what's causing it, and what a retinaculum is. Okay? We also see this in pregnant women also, because their bodies produce a lot more fluid. We call it edema. They have a lot more tissue, and then they have usually a temporary fix. They have extra fluid in their wrists over here, but we usually just give them a brace and we tell them don't crochet as much. You know what I'm saying? But it's not because of the crocheting; it's because of the extra fluid. But if they can live with it for like the next few months or so, when she delivers the baby, it'll go back to normal. So this is just a temporary thing. All right? It's not often it happens, but I've seen probably about 7 cases of it. Okay. All right. Then we have 3 connective tissue sheaths. We've got something called epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. Now it's easier for us to just go right to the picture, and you'll see where these different things are. All right. So here's your muscle, there's your tendon, connecting to the bone, okay? And what we have over here is that we have muscle cells here, and then we have, around the muscle cells, we have something called endomysium. It's connective tissue that holds the cells together. And then we have, if this is your whole muscle over here, the muscle itself is actually broken down into what we call fascicles, okay? And be careful the way you spell fascicle too. It's not as straightforward as what you think. But around the fascicles, we have another type of connective tissue called perimysium, okay? And then we have around the whole thing, the fascia that's going around the whole thing, we have a special name for it called epimysium. So we have endo, meaning inward. We have perimysium, which is going to be more on the middle area, and then the epimysium on the outside. Okay? Questions about that? Just anatomy wise. Okay? Okay, now, cytology and histology. Muscle terms. Now, we already took a test in cytology, and we learned about all the terms and all the organelles and stuff. Now, I just want you to realize that there are going to be new terms for muscle cells, but you basically have already learned them. We just changed the name to really screw up your minds. It's on that list that when I go up there, who came up with these new names, okay? You don't need to change them, but someone did, and we have to know what they're talking about. So understand, the names have just changed. That's it, okay? Don't let them scare you. For instance, a muscle fiber is a muscle cell. So when we talk about a fiber of a muscle, we're talking about the cell of a muscle. Don't ask, just accept it until I go up there and find out who was the one, and I'll beat them silly, okay? I'll be thinking of you guys. We also have the sarcolemma, which is basically the cell membrane of the muscle. It's called a sarcolemma, okay? We also have the sarcoplasm, which is the cytoplasm of muscle. You're understanding what I'm saying, right? Right? Sarcoplasmic reticulum is the smooth ER of the muscle cell. So we just changed the names. Same thing, okay? You can also see prefixes that refer to muscle. Myo, as you've seen. Endomysium, right? That kind of thing. Here's myci over there, similar. And as you've seen up here, sarco. You can probably take a hint that sarco must mean muscle also. So you'll see those quite often throughout this whole PowerPoint. Okay? Alright, so this is how it's broken down. We have the muscle over here. We have the fascicle over here. The fascicle is made up of many muscle fibers, i.e. muscle cells. Okay? You're starting to see those striations, and now you're going to actually understand what makes them striate by the orientation there. And inside the muscle cell, you're going to have mitochondria, you're going to have nuclei, you're going to have all the usual stuff that you've seen before, but we're going to have a lot more of something called myofibrils, or microfilaments. These are contractile filaments that are actually going to cause the contraction to happen. They're made up of what we call a thin filament called actin and a thick filament called myosin. And the way the actin and myosin are related to each other creates the stripe pattern that you see, the striations. So we'll talk about that. So a muscle fiber, okay, or muscle cell, same thing, okay? It contains the usual organelles that you learned about before. We're going to have myofibrils, which are now also going to be those contractile organelles, the actin and myosin. You're going to have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is really the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. But inside here, it has something we call calcium. So we're going to start now introducing why calcium is so much more important than, you know, bones and teeth, right, to make them strong. We're going to show you on here. And then there's also something called the T-tubule, which is an extension of the cell membrane. Okay? I'll explain what that is all about. I have videos to show you on this too. The myofibrils are these contractile organelles, and this is what the muscle cells are loaded with. Okay? They're arranged by with these actin and myosin molecules, and they're arranged in a way that we're going to have these bands. There's going to be dark A bands and light I bands. I don't know why they came up with this. There's some rationale where they came with the A's and I's, but sometimes you're going to see a lot more of what I call this medical alphabet. And you're going to see a lot more of this coming in when we talk about what this, how the orientation of the actin and myosins are. But you see a lot more of these letters in here. So whenever it's possible, use these letters to help you with mnemonics. Okay? For instance, dark A bands, light I bands. Okay? And you'll see them light, and we call them the I bands. You see them dark, and we call them A bands. Okay? So you can see over here the dark bands, and you got the light bands. Okay? You've seen it on a microscopic level when you saw the striations. Okay? Again, here's the myofibril, okay, which is the actin and myosin crisscrossing over here. We'll talk about that later. All right, soon. And then we have mitochondria in here. You're going to see the nuclei. Now, this is a skeletal muscle. So this is a muscle fiber, meaning a muscle cell. And in a skeletal muscle, you learn that there is more than one nuclei there, okay, or more than one nucleus. The reason why is because all those proteins that you're seeing there, those myofibrils, we have to make a lot of them. They're the ones that are going to contribute to the contraction of the muscle. So one nucleus is just not going to be able to produce enough of the myofibrils. So we're going to put a lot more nuclei in skeletal muscle to produce more of those myofibrils, and that's why we see skeletal muscles as multinucleated. We have glycogen. Glycogen is located in myofibrils, and it's going to store polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are long chains of glucose. Okay, so we have a nice storage site for glucose found in this glycogen. Okay, we also have myoglobin in the muscle. Myoglobin, similar to hemoglobin, myoglobin is going to be found in muscles, whereas hemoglobin is in red blood cells. And this is loaded with oxygen. So we have glycogen that's going to store a lot of glucose. We have myoglobin that's going to store a lot of oxygen. Those are the two main ingredients for certain something we've been talking about all along. What is that? ATP. So this muscle is going to need a lot of ATP, and we have a nice storage site of this whole thing. Okay, it's got a warehouse of this. The myoglobin contains iron just like hemoglobin, and that kind of gives the red pigment. That's why when you look at muscle, when you look at like just dried up muscle, it's got that brownish color. The myoglobin is the thing that's going to contribute to that redness over there. It's like a red pigment. Hint, you should understand what myoglobin does. Okay, at least brownish red pigment. Okay, so let's talk about the sarcomere. Okay, the sarcomere is the functional unit of the contraction that we're going to see. All right, so it's the smallest contractile unit of a muscle, and there's about 10,000 of these sarcomeres just in one myofibril. Well, we got thousands of myofibrils just in one muscle cell. So you can imagine what this is going to lead to. Now, a sarcomere lies between, well, we have one sarcomere. The end of one sarcomere is called a Z disc. And it keeps on going until you get to another Z disc. So that whole area there is called a sarcomere. And I'll show you a picture of what I mean by that. Okay? The muscle contraction depends on the two types of myofilaments or myofibrils. They're called actin and myosin. Okay? We have a thin actin and a thick myosin. So let's look at this. This is a myofibril. This is a muscle cell. Muscle cell is loaded with myofibrils. The myofibril is made up of sarcomeres, from one Z disc to another Z disc to another Z disc and so forth. That's a sarcomere. That's a sarcomere. And there's like one myofibril has about 10,000 sarcomeres just in one of them. Now, when we break this up even closer, we're starting to see medical alphabet. All right? Z disc to Z disc. That's one sarcomere. Okay? We have actin this area here, attached to a Z disc. Okay? The H zone is this area here, and this darker area is myosin. Notice that the actin and the myosin ride along each other. And this, the way it actually has, you'll see these myosins have these little bumps, we call them myosin heads. That's what's going to actually cause the contraction to occur. The H zone over here has a little bump in it. That little bump is called the M line. And it's made up of desmin, which is just a concentrated area of the myosin. It's a protein that's there. We have the H zone here, and we got an I band over here. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing. Not already. You're going to see the actin and myosin, kind of like my fingers, going like this. So this is actin, this is myosin. They kind of ride over each other. Make sense? Okay? Contraction, relaxation. Contraction, relaxation. So they will move. The H band, or the H zone, is the area where the myosin, the dark area, does not have the actin overlying it. Okay? It's there. The I band is where the actin is, but it does not overlap with the myosin. I got more pictures to show you so you can see it from different angles. So, do you see where the I band is? It's that area where the myosin is not a part of. The middle of the H zone is going to be the M line. The middle of the I band is the Z disc. Notice that the H zone will move. It'll change. The I band will also change. But look at the A band. The A band is where it starts at where the myosin is to the other side of where the myosin is. That won't change. Does that make sense? All right. So, let me do more of these, and hopefully I'm going to have less people confused. Okay. Plus, I have the video showing all this too. So, recap of this: the H zone is the center of the myosin. The M band is the center of the myosin that's condensed, that little bump there, where the desmin is. The A band is the entire length of the myosin. So the center of the A band is going to be the M. When you look at the picture, you'll see what I mean. The Z disc is the center and the attachment of the actin. And the I band encompasses the entire length of the actin except where the myosin is going to overlap. So my mnemonic on this is hazy. H is surrounded by A, and Z is surrounded by I. Okay? The sarcomere is going from Z disc to Z disc. So here's another picture showing the same thing. There's a Z disc and there's a Z disc. So that's one sarcomere right there. Okay? The purple here is going to be your myosin. The M line is right here where desmin will be. The actin is the pink areas, the pink lines that are attached to the Z discs. The H zone is where the myosin is, but the actin is not overlapping. The I band is where the actin is, but it's not where the myosin is overlapping. The I and the H zones are the only ones that change. Everything else doesn't. The H and the I. I changes. Okay? Pretty easy. Another picture is showing the same thing, but a close-up of it. There's your M line over here, the Z disc from here to here. The blue here is going to be actin attached to the Z disc. You have the myosin over here. The H zone, well, it's up, yeah, it's showing up there, but it's this area here. The place where it's myosin that the actin is not overlapping. You can see it even on an electron microscope, these areas here. Okay? And if you put it together, electron microscope, there's a schematic picture showing all this. Okay? So far, so good? All right? Some teachers ask the students to draw this out on an exam. You won't find me doing that. I got to read these things. And you labeling it as not working. But you'll have this on your exam, but the thing is, I'll give you the picture and I'll ask you questions about it. So you should be able to understand this because it won't be labeled. It'll just have multiple choice kind of labels.